Okay, in this video I'm going to go over the case study document for Amelia. As you can see, it's 381 pages, so I'm just going to highlight some of the key things that are important. But with Amelia, we have a 12-year-old girl, and the chief complaints are autoimmunity. She has Hashimoto's vitiligo, vulvar lichen sclerosis, which is like an inflammatory skin reaction around the vagina and anal area, gut issues, atypical biopsy results. She had some inflammatory markers there, constipation pathogens, and then neurological issues, which include coordination issues, dyspraxia. Dyspraxia is difficulty coordinating movements, inattentiveness, ADHD, poor executive function, and then motor issues, slight shaking of the hands at the end of movement, and then vestibular and proprioceptive issues. So if you look at her document, we can see she's got some clear histories of Hashimoto's, and she has some gut biopsies, some intestinal inflammatory responses. She's worked with lots of different practitioners, and when you've seen that she complains things like dyspraxia, they've worked with a healthcare professional at some point. Now, motor issues, slight shaking of the hand at the end of movement. So we're going to need to really look at this in the exam. This is more likely a termination tremor or kinetic tremor. So those are going to be involving the cerebellum. So remember, resting tremors are Parkinsonian, but shaking of the hands or tremors at the end of movement, that's a termination tremor, or also known as a kinetic tremor, which is cerebellum. And then if we take a look, she's on low-dose naltrexone at 3 milligrams already at age 12. If you look at the nutraceutical she's obviously taking various things for the gut and some kind of mushroom blend for focus. Okay. So if you take a look back at the narrative, there's a few things I want to highlight here that may explain where she's at. So she writes, my pregnancy with Amelia happened during, this is the mother obviously writing this, my pregnancy with Amelia happened during the time I was experiencing a traumatic event of losing my mom to cancer. Thinking back, unfortunately, there might have been toxic exposure when I had to go to the dentist to fix one filling. There's also one instance when I had to take one Tylenol due to fever in early pregnancy. I was receiving a dosage of tiviplane drug to prevent contractions for a 3-month period. This medicine is known to cause birth defects. I was also given 2 steroid shots upon admission to the hospital as a prevention in case the baby is born prematurely. The birth itself was natural, but indeed, unfortunately, was given antibiotics through the IV during the birth process. Then they uncovered strep B colonization. I believe I also received antibiotics during pregnancy. So if you remember the childhood developmental course for the Crosby Institute, we went over all the allostatic load of various variables that can impact childhood developmental disorders and potentially things like microglial inflammation is found with autism. Here we can already see some significant assault to her microbiome with a lot of antibiotics. We can see that she was put on H2 blocker medications when she was 2 weeks old and remained on it for 1.5 years. So the first year and a half, she didn't have any hydrochloric acid to neutralize her stomach and optimize the environment for the microbiome. And then she's been experiencing constipation issues for around 1 year to this day. So, there's definitely some assault to the microbiome just from early childhood. She's also prescribed antibiotics on a few occasions for various ear infections and strep infections. And then at one time she developed Russian fungal infection and was put on Lotrimal, clotrimazole, and nystatin. So a lot of antifungals, a lot of antibiotics, H2 blockers. This is just the first few weeks of life. And then she seemed to have some reactions to vaccination. Unfortunately, during 3 to 4 month vaccination, she experienced a negative reaction. She was constantly arching back and crying unconsolably for days. We also noticed eye twitching, weaker head control, and head banging. There could be an underlying neuroinflammatory response which may have been triggered by immunization. Compared to others, she seemed uncoordinated and shaky when playing with building blocks. When she was around 4 years old, she had a fall from a couch where she banged her head on the edge of the table and needed staples. So we're seeing uncoordination here. We're seeing even to this day she has some degree of coordination issues, motor issues that are there. And she started to then develop patches of vitiligo at age 4. That also has some vitiligo white spots, but it's on a small area. So we can see some genetic susceptibility from a father to autoimmune disease with vitiligo. Amelia now has vitiligo all over her body. Her blood work showed slightly elevated TPO levels throughout her early childhood. So here's the Hashimoto's. And vitiligo, as you all know, it's an autoimmune response against the melanin proteins in the skin. So they get white spots all throughout. And the TPO levels in early childhood, this means that the Hashimoto's was already turned on. In 2015, moved to an older home. We now believe that Amelia was exposed to hidden black mold in one area of the home at age 5 through 13. So when you look at the labs, did you see some mycotoxin slight elevations? I'm not sure how accurate this is. To talk about her in the history. She's also very sensitive to background noise and dysregulated a noisy room or playground. She often jumped on the way from school, made humming noises to self-regulate. So it's that we evaluate Amelia. So these are all the things you see with different spectrum, childhood autism spectrum patterns. We don't know if she's on the spectrum. We have to kind of see how she's functioning. Amelia was diagnosed by sensory processing disorder as well as developmental coordination disorder, dyspraxia. So you can see she's not developing throughout her brain. The sensory processing disorder, we're going to really need to pay attention to her input of sensory inputs like light touch, pinwheel, vibration sense, temperature, sound, light, and see how she processes that information. And then we're going to definitely need to do some rapid motor movements and motor coordination activities during the exam to see, how they're defining dyspraxia. She's now less sensory or squirmy and seems that her body is more calm these days. The biggest shift was perhaps 2016 through 17 when she started switching to a gluten and dairy-free diet. So that's good, she did that. Most people with Hashimoto's, as you know, have gluten dairy issues. Her inattentiveness, coordination, executive function is a big problem. So this is probably where the whole ADHD pathway comes in. If you really look at this just from the first couple of pages, we can see some significant issues to the microbiome, autoimmunity, and some childhood neurodevelopmental disorders. The inattentiveness, which is associated with attention deficit hyperactivity disorder, involves the frontal lobe. That's the area of the brain involved with executive functions, focus, and concentration. Coordination, this is going to involve the motor system, particularly the cerebellum. Executive function is the frontal lobe. Sensory processing disorder is going to be the parietal lobe. So we can kind of see inflammation all throughout the brain, developmental delays all throughout the brain so far. It was observed that she always had a vestibular process challenges as well as muscle grating issues, slammed a cup of water on the table or hugged it hard. So this happens when people have optic dyspraxia, and this is like, for example, they try to reach for something, but their hand either is too close or overshoots, under overshoots. So that's involving the cerebellum and optic connections from the back of her brain. So we can see some problems there from her history. In 2016, she started working with a functional neurologist. Extensive testing was done which showed autoimmune issues, and we'll go over those, but there's some autoantibodies in a record as we'll go over it to neurological target proteins like myelin basic protein. And we also already know she has TPO antibodies, and we also know she has melanin antibodies because she has vitiligo. So we see autoimmune reactions, antibody responses through many areas of her tissues. It's many areas of her body. Okay, impaired detox pathways, I'm not sure what they're referring to. Her autoimmune issues started with vitiligo that showed in her legs and hand and face. She had elevated TPO, tested positive for MTHFR mutation that's homozygous. Okay. Difficulty digesting proteins. So she's got some issues with digesting proteins and fats. They went through parasite cleanses. You'll see throughout history that she had multiple GI panels. No real pattern of real parasites, but lots of patterns of consistent dysbiosis. And then she went on different protocols. Some made her worse. Not many that made a big difference with her. And she was given some eye movement exercises, probably for some neurological rehabilitation of some kind. And then the diagnosis she's been given in 2015 were dyspraxia, coordination issues, sensory and auditory processing disorder, elevated TPO with Hashimoto's, and gut autoimmune diagnosis so far. The other key things that were significant for me as I was going through this is that colonoscopy and endoscopy showed lymphoid aggregate with reactive lymphoid follicles. And this is something you'll see with severe intestinal inflammation, typically with autoimmunity. So right away we know like there's autoimmunity in the brain, autoimmunity in the thyroid, autoimmunity in the skin, and likely autoimmunity in the gut. So this is like a systemic autoimmune response. If we look at the things that's helped her, she writes gluten-free diet, which is typical with all many Hashimoto's, actually not all, but many Hashimoto's people. Hyperbaric sessions, ionic foot bath, fish oils, PC, probably phosphatidylcholine, focused mushrooms, reishi mushrooms, homeopathic, LVN, magnesium, CoQ10, vitamin D3, Metacore, digestive butter spray, Bicozin, and BioRay focus herbs. So basically, things that have helped her seem to be things that help with focus and things that support the brain and being on a gluten-free diet. Okay. Things that cause reaction, pregnenolone. I don't know why in the world someone would put a 12-year-old on pregnenolone, but here we are. And then we can look at her things that cause her. She did some kind of detox with the Clean Garden method, automatic response testing, laser treatments, and then they cause reactions. We want to find out what kind of reaction did it cause. What kind of reaction it caused can give us a clue. If she had neurological symptoms, they can let us know that like her neurological autoimmune response was there. If her thyroid went crazy, that would give us a clue that her autoimmunity was triggered. If she starts to have more white spots expressed with her vitiligo, we know that her autoimmune skin disorder was aggravated. So those are all going to be important to look at. So if we take a look here, this is the timeline of sequence lab tests. And we can see in 2016, that's when the TPO started to show up, was elevated. White blood cells were slightly low. And then some MTHFR issues. Now this case is way beyond just like needing folate or methylfolate. This is definitely an autoimmune and neurodevelopmental disorder. So she's not digesting proteins on her GI panels. This seems to keep showing up. You'll see there were like possible parasites, possible Lyme. They're not. They're negative. They're just being told that as you look at her lab test. Cyrix found the TPO myelin basic protein autoimmunity. Her secondary IgA levels have been up and down because they're just ongoing intestinal inflammation. Her colonoscopy biopsy showed these lymphoid aggregate and reactive lymphoid follicles, which you see with significant inflammatory conditions of the gut and even autoimmunity of the gut. So if we look at the next part here, which is the brain nutrition assessment form, we can see her endurance of her brain is pretty low. 3 means the symptoms are almost always. And we can see some blood sugar patterns here. Now, remember, blood sugar patterns are a major trigger in autoimmunity. So now we have autoimmunity in multiple target proteins. So we can see that energy levels drop in the afternoon, sugar and sweet cravings after meals, increased frequency of urination, difficulty falling asleep, increased appetite. So she's got like a mixed hypoglycemia and insulin resistance pattern. So dysglycemia at age 12 with autoimmunity is not good. Dry, flaky, unhealthy skin. We'll see those with like essential fatty acid imbalances. And then lots of constipation and intestinal motility issues where she's not able to digest foods very well. So we know her gut's not doing very well. Brain fatigue when the body's inflamed, so we suspect someone with like neuroinflammation. 100% gluten-free diet, they put 99%, so that's not good. Let's see what that 1% is all about. Okay, number 10 here. Now if you look at her brain health nutrition assessment form, remember in the clinical mastership program in the library, if you're not familiar with these forms, is the key for all these forms. But section 13 with something that stuck out. These are symptoms associated with catecholamines like epinephrine, norepinephrine. They activate the frontal lobe. And the frontal lobe pathways are involved with mental speed and concentration and cognitive processing, mental performance, attention, concentration. Those are all the epinephrine, norepinephrine pathways, epinephrine and norepinephrine pathways of the frontal cortex. And then they put needs coffee or caffeine to improve. 12-year-old, not much coffee, but so caffeine here. We might have to think about using some natural catecholamines, support things that naturally raise epinephrine, norepinephrine, and maybe even caffeine, because if she's in an attention deficit pattern, there are some studies that do that stimulant increased neuroplasticity, and the issue we have when someone's 12 years old with a child developmental disorder is, if you remember from the child developmental course, we talked about lots of research in neurodevelopment, but gray matter fully develops by age 9, and then white matter develops around the teens, late teens, 19, 20, something like around there. So there's a window of time that we're really concerned about. So when we see all these areas of the brain not developing and underlying autoimmunity and thyroid issues, we really have to be very careful to see what is happening with her. Now, the other big concern right away, if you can see from here, is she's been diagnosed hypothyroid, but if you look at her medications, she's not on thyroid hormones. This is a really, really big deal. So you have to have thyroid hormones to develop. So when mothers are hypothyroid during pregnancy, there's a strong potential for mental types of retardation with children that have a mother that's hypothyroid during pregnancy. And then here we can see neurodevelopmental patterns in her history that are not improving with an underlying Hashimoto's. So not having thyroid hormones can be a huge factor in why she's not able to improve and get better. It's surprising she's not on them, and we want to try to figure out why she wasn't on them, what happened. And the classic criteria is you have a high TSH, shows hypothyroidism. She has that if you go through her documents. So this is a big issue. The hypothyroidism alone can have a huge impact on her gut microbiome, or for sure her intestinal motility. It modulates the T cells and B cells for autoimmune reactivity. Really critical for general metabolism and activation of all metabolic pathways. So we definitely want to figure out what's going on. That could be one of the major reasons she's not recovering and not getting out of this neurodevelopmental disorder. Okay. Then they put like some things she might be exposed to: amalgams, vaccine reaction, mold exposure, as well. Okay. So now we can look at the brain region localization form. So this just classifies symptoms and sections. This is graded between 0 and 4. 100% means symptoms all the time. So right away, when I just highlighted what was 4s, which means almost all the time. Anytime you see 3s or 4s, it's a really big deal. You really should see 0s. Occasional 1, maybe a 2 here and there. But when you see a bunch of 4s in one section, that lets you know that part of the brain is not working. So this is all the prefrontal areas, frontal lobe areas. These are involved executive functions, planning, attention, concentration, all the things you would see with attention deficit, hyperactivity disorder, ADHD patterns. We have that here. Then we can see her parietal lobe not functioning well here. Somatosensory, difficulty in perception of position of limbs, difficulty spatial awareness when moving, laying back. So we definitely want to check things related to these in the exam very carefully. With the frontal lobe, with focus, attention, concentration, we just want to see if we do a history, we ask her a question, can she answer? How long does it take for her to totally lose focus and get bored? We want to see if she's any kind of fidgeting when we're doing the exam and history, if she's all over the place. Throughout the exam and throughout the history, we'd expect to see that, just knowing her history so far and seeing the areas that are involved with this type of questionnaire form. This is where the sensory processing disorder comes in, so we've got to see how bad this is. Again, things like pinprick sensation, light touch, temperature, these will all be important to evaluate during the exam. And then more parietal lobe, right-left confusion, difficulty with math. So we know her parietal lobe has been not developing, inflamed, injured at this point. Then we see lots of cerebellar symptoms here. We see they need to hold on a handrail or watch each step carefully when they go downstairs. It's like a 12-year-old shouldn't have to do that. Slight hand shake when reaching out, that's your kinetic tremor. That's what they put on their chief complaint as well. And then some significant issues with bowel movement and constipation, which could be motility or could be severe dysbiosis, could be a combination of both. Easily startled. And then, have you experienced sudden muscle jerks throughout the body? We want to see what those are. Does she have any kind of movement disorders or myoclonic jerks? That's going to be important to figure out from the history. Have you ever been told that you stare into space while lip smacking, chewing, or fidgeting? Not aware of. Do you experience sudden emotional responses? It's kind of fading into space. We want to make sure she doesn't have absence seizures when we do a history with her. Absent seizures are going to be the kind of seizure where a child will tune out, and then they'll finally snap back in, but they won't realize they tuned out. and they won't have any recollection of what anyone told them during their seizure phase. So that staring into nowhere and tuning out is actually, in some kids, absent seizures. So we need to figure out if that's what we're dealing with there. And then experiencing sudden heart race, racing heart, sudden loss of bladder, intestinal spasm. We've got to see what this is. That could just be like the anxiety response. And then spontaneous tingling of pins and needles and numbness. That's definitely going to be from injured parietal functions like epileptiform or spontaneous activity of neurons firing in the parietal lobe, which he has some symptoms of. And then experiencing flashes of light, jagged lines, visual fields. Those are you're going to see with dysfunction in the occipital lobe, seizure activity in the occipital lobe areas. Okay. So right away we can see a 12-year-old that her brain is seriously in trouble. And we have this window of time from age 12 to maybe, at the best scenario, age 20, 21, to try to get some plasticity and dampen the neuroinflammatory models that may be there, and see if we can get her neurological function to work. It's very, if she has ADHD now and sensory processing disorder now, and it doesn't get corrected by the time her white matter develops, the potential for changing those when she's an adult goes way, way down. So we have, in one sense, a great opportunity to really make some big change with her before her white matter completely develops, like she'll never have again in her life. But there's so much going on with her, not only her childhood developmental disorder, there could be some prime glial cells that took place during the pregnancy. There's hypothyroidism that's going on here. So these are all big issues. And then if we look at the metabolic assessment form, constipation, difficulty bowel movements, poor bowel, like her gut's not working. We definitely want to look at the brain-gut axis pathway. Since she's got some childhood developmental disorders, we want to look at her gag reflex. So make sure she has healthy gag reflex. We want to have her say, "Aw." See that palate move. Those are all cranial nerve 10 activity, vagal activity that we want to see what's happening. If the palate doesn't move and she doesn't have a healthy normal gag reflex, then we know some of her gut symptoms may be like a brain-gut axis. If those are working, then we know we're really dealing with a local intestinal issue. Now, you can have severe dysbiosis that shuts down motility. That's possible. If you look at her file, you see lots of GI panels done, all with consistent patterns of dysbiosis. And then this is like a child neurotransmitter assessment form. Same thing, it's just the form that was done. It's just looking at epinephrine or norepinephrine pathways. So we got to see what we can do about those things as we look at the big picture. So again, more of this frontal lobe epinephrine, norepinephrine pathway. It's not functioning well. Okay. Then here we just see like a file of all these things. This is 2-month referring for or arching. Okay, let's see, feeds. She's having some problems early on. Some of these are not as critical for us, so these early childhood reports. Here we see in 2015, so, 2015, here we're in 2023. So when she was about 5 years old, just her lab panel, white blood cells are 8.4 to 5-year-old, wow. There's some early immune-related issues, there's some early patterns of potential anemia. So we see some of those early on. She was tested for measles, rubella, those are negative. Lumps, lead, blood. Vitamin D levels have been consistently low. If you look at all their lab tests, she's just not getting her vitamin D levels up. So one of the things we're going to definitely want to put in our protocol is going to be vitamin D. We probably should get an updated vitamin D test. And then these are just like food reactions. Here we have visual analysis by nuclear. It's like a neurological evaluation of her eye movements. They just say oculomotor dysfunction, which just means she's not moving her eyes properly. We definitely want to do some eye movement exams during the exam, pursuits, saccades, optokinetics, convergence, divergence, see if those are working well. We want to have her track eye movements, see if they're smooth or if she's able to even do it. She'd have the ability to focus on it. Some genetic testing, just some more routine blood work, looking at the different immunoglobulins. Like IgAs on the lower end. But you see she has chronic dysbiosis there. She's not hypothyroid at this point in 2016, so she's probably around 6-7 years old here. And then white blood cells here, low. Neutrophils are low. So she was at 8, now she's 4. Here you can see the TPO antibodies show up outside the lab range. So the lab range is less than 9 for the way the methodology of this TPO test. So 24 is clearly out of range. And let's see if they did TSH here. I don't think they did. They had checked for gliadin, which didn't show up on this test, but Quest isn't the best lab to find some of these. Their standard deviations for positive are like 3 standard deviations from the mean. Here you can see they were testing for Lyme. This is the immunoblot test. She only has one of the bands for IgG reactive. That's not positive. This is like, if you read the history, they'll make a reference to borderline Lyme. This is nowhere close to borderline Lyme. This is negative. Here you can see like one of the IgM bands is reactive. So you really have to have these positive. Plus you need the antibodies, which wasn't done to identify it. Okay, the Lyme disease Borrelia antibodies. Here you can see vitamin D low again. They checked for infections like mycoplasma pneumonia, which obviously was negative. Coxsackie virus, negative. Tetanus, negative. Herpes virus. She has herpes virus 6 IgG. That's like 98% of the population. That doesn't really mean anything. Vitamin D levels. Here look at 125. They're within range, lower end of the range. Look at her folate. They checked in the blood mercury, magnesium, selenium, lead. And in the blood, that really lets you know if there's any acute exposures. Her levels are all normal. Here you have some methylation, SNPs they're checking for, carnitine, lots of pathogen screening. Okay, here's the Brachyphory, the Lyme bacterium test, less than 40 negative. Just again, a bunch of random. When you look at this file, you have to go, how many tens of thousands of dollars have been spent? And really inefficient testing. So many different infections that aren't really involved here. Okay, here's lab test 2016 serum, that's 6-7 age. Now our white blood cells are 4.4, now they're up to 9.3. So you see white blood cells really surging all over the place. So that's sometimes, this activation of an inflammatory autoimmune response, like a relapse, remission. I don't know why they keep testing these pathogens. Okay, here is a urine test. By the way, they're all negative. All the pathogens are negative. Here's a urine test for minerals. Then if you look at the heavy metals in the urine, like these are really good. Like she's nothing really outside the range. Everyone's gonna have some of these slight levels within the reference range. She's just slightly over. Hopefully they weren't freaked out to think they had some kind of heavy metal poisoning, or toxic levels. They don't. This is it looks like just a clearance urine test. Now if you did a challenge test, of course everything would be out of range, as it would with anyone. Some genetic testing. I guess there's just someone's notes in the charts. This is where we start to look at the comprehensive stool analysis. This is in 2017. So we can see she's having a hard time with some pancreatic enzymes. And then when you look at all these different stool panels, you'll just see dysbiosis all over the place. Nothing really significant. Some of these levels are off. Now here you see white blood cells low again. There isn't anything very significant with a lot of these documents. And TSH here, like this is clearly hypothyroidism in 2017. So it's 6 years ago. So when she was about 6, 7, and if she's been hypothyroid for the past 6 years, that's going to really impact her health. So we got to see what her history of thyroid hormones are. Already here, she's showing patterns of hypothyroidism. Okay, and then just more of the same, just like more white blood cells here and there, some minerals, some copper, some pathogens. This is like some just neurological testing for development, motor skills. She's definitely off on some of these motor and sensory testings. This is like testing for mercury. You can see she's not really that bad with her concentrations. I'd be happy with that if it was mine. And then organics testing, nothing significant there. And then we go back to CDSA. So with the CDSAs, these comprehensive stool analysis, you continue to see like imbalanced and short chain fatty acids, and difficulty with digestion, and you'll see just patterns of dysbiosis in these. Here's some mycotoxin testing that was done. Nothing really too significant here. Here you can see white blood cells back to 3.5. Here you see the TSH levels up at 26. I'm sorry, the TPO levels up at 26. Back to lead. I don't know why they keep trying to measure the same thing if it was negative before. This is the GI panel. Again, patterns of dysbiosis you can see in her history. And then we get into some Cyrex testing done in 2019. So this is like when she's around 8. So she's reacting to Brazil raw nuts. Definitely she's acting to chicken and turkey out of range. Food coloring. Okay. Here you see the TPO antibody again, positive. That's her Hashimoto's. And this is her neurological inflammatory pattern, myelin basic protein. So we're concerned about that. She also has alpha beta tubulin and synapsin. These are neurological proteins. So she's got the alpha beta tubulins, the synapsin, and the myelin basic protein patterns for autoimmunity and thyroid. So this is our brain and thyroid autoimmunity. Then she has some chemical reactions to benzene rings, so like things like cigarette smoke, car exhaust will be an issue. Aflatoxins are just going to be found in any kind of stored food like nuts and seeds that are stored in bins. Mixed heavy metals. This is not the amount of heavy metals, but immune reactions to heavy metals. So it's not necessarily associated with load, but really loss of chemical tolerance. She definitely has some loss of chemical tolerance. So her body's ability to not react to environmental compounds is less than ideal. She's reacting to mixed heavy metals, benzene rings, and aflatoxins. That's part of autoimmunity. You start to lose your chemical tolerance. Here we can see some patterns of leaky gut in 2019. No surprise with people that have multiple autoimmunities. Here we see some antibody markers associated with bacterial dysbiosis. Then she's got some deficient levels of nutrients based on these tests, which we're going to really want to do a thorough dietary history and see what's going on. Here we see some of these assays. I don't believe this panel is very reliable. They're not using the gold standard LISA. So like here we're seeing it negative. Clearly she has neurological autoimmunity. We saw it with the Cyrex test. Here we see it negative. Clearly she has symptoms, signs of all neurological autoimmunity. Here we see negative. This is why you should always use the gold standard. This is not it. This is not the gold standard. Just a waste of money here. Yeah. Everything that she has clinical symptoms of and other labs have found positive, all negative here. Okay. Let's get past this test here. SpectraCell. Here we can see like her thyroid level or T3 levels, free levels low, TPO levels are high. TSH is within normal. So that's one of the problems with Hashimoto's and very aggressive relapsing remissions. Sometimes when the immune system gets flared up during the autoimmune process, which then destroys the thyroid gland, the breakdown of those tissues release thyroid hormones, so the TSH comes down. It's almost like it's mimicking the gland making thyroid hormones, but the gland's not making thyroid hormones. It's just thyroid hormones in the bloodstream because the tissues are breaking down, not because of synthesis. And every now and then you get these TSHs that are normal. So she's probably in this relapse remission type of phase with Hashimoto's. This is just another pattern with dysbiosis. Here she went through central auditory testing, and this is another pattern of her auditory processing or central processing disorder. So that's the auditory cortex, so some integration issues. So you can see really all different regions of her brain is involved. She's got like this significant pattern there. Here's some EEG studies that are less than ideal. Mineral test reports. Like just routine lab test. Here you see the TPO again elevated. Her TSI is negative, so it's less likely it's Graves', most likely it's Hashimoto's. They're doing hormone testing on a 12-year-old with ranges for a 20-year-old and older. Again, just waste of money. You feel bad for families that work with practitioners that don't know what they're doing, and then the family with, is wasting so much resources they could have spent in other things. Here we see the eosinophils a little bit low, percentage-wise. White blood cells, 6.9, back up. TPO high again, thyroglobulin high. I mean, every time it seems like it's pretty sure, yeah, it's Hashimoto's here. Again, just more patterns of yeast overgrowth, dysbiosis. Looking at some mitochondrial markers, not sure how accurate that test is. Here we see her reverse T3 a little bit low. So on the conversion, it would actually be high. So it's a little bit low. I'm not so worried about under conversion. More routine lab tests. TSH here is 2.859, so she's not in a hypothyroid stage here, which she is in the past. Or, maybe the reason she's not on thyroid hormones is because the time she went in to get her thyroid checked, her TSH was fluctuating between normal and abnormal, and it was normal, which happens all the time in Hashimoto's. Another Lyme test, definitely negative. Co-infections, negative. And some micronutrient testing. TSH here, 4.88. It's pretty clear. This is 2021. She's hypothyroid. Antibodies are elevated. 163. It's pretty high. Okay. So it definitely has hypothyroidism. Hashimoto's flares up. This is the natural killer cell marker, CD857. Both these are percentage in total. They're low. You'll see these when the immune system gets really wiped out, which she has. It's chronic autoimmunity, or just tests that don't mean it. This shouldn't have been done. Waste of money and time. More of dysbiosis profiles. As you read through her profile, you can see how many different nutraceutical protocols she's been for a gut. Here's 2022, so we're getting to some more recent lab tests. So this would be about a year ago. Hypothyroidism clearly identified. Glucose borderline. TPO 176, very clear pattern there. So, just random IBD test. This is the endoscopy, where they look through it and you can see some inflammatory red irritation areas throughout her GI tract. The report basically identifies these elevated lymphatic patterns, lymphoid tissue infiltration, severe basically you see that severe inflammation and autoimmunity. And then just some pathology reports that were done. Now here in 2022, we're seeing her RBC hemoglobin hematocrit a little bit high. I'm not sure if she was the pregnenolone she was given or something, but usually with the higher testosterone or those types of patterns, these can be elevated. Glucose is 76, a little bit low, more on the hypoglycemia side. One of her transaminases was high. IGF-1 was a little bit low, which is not good when you're not developing. Hemoglobin A1C, 5.6 for a 12-year-old. She's borderline being pre-diabetic. So that's where we see a lot of insulin-related issues. So clearly, like we see insulin issues, we see Hashimoto's is really, really clear. We see the autoimmunity all over the place. Interleukin-6 elevated, 48.0. That's an inflammatory cytokine. It affects both sides. You'll see it high in many autoimmune disease patients. Back to pathogens. Wow. It's a lot of testing that is cheap. It's like diagnosis is so clear from the lab tests. I don't know why. Checking all these different markers. Like, do they really think they're going to give vitamin A to fix this? Okay. Here we can see vitamin D low again. Yeah, so as you go through this, it's just a bunch of panels. This one in 2022, like you see all this testing being done. Wow. Mitochondria AB526, atypical panca. This is several $1,000s of unnecessary testing. Wow. Okay. There's like this need for whoever they're working with to constantly check for lead, mercury, blood, and arsenic. Just more and more of the same. So that's pretty much it. Let's look at the file. So, going into the history and exam, we really want to find out more about the motor disorders and the tremor. We definitely want to check for the tremor pathways. We want to check for sensory processing issues. We want to check for movement coordination, dyspraxia. We want to look at her focus, attention, or concentration throughout her history. We want to see how progressive stuff is. Like if we start to see upper motor neuron signs, we know she's got some demyelination. She doesn't have any brain imaging. If we see a lot of hard neurological signs, we may want to do that. So the exam will let us know if we need to go there. Definitely want to look in the exam for like brain gut axis issues. Look at her palate, see if those move, those patterns move, and really want to talk to the mom about the hypothyroidism issue and what happened with medication there, and just figure out what's going on with her general health and diet throughout the day. But that's the basic case review file. I hope you found going through it useful for you, and you can obviously spend more time going through the document yourself and looking for clues about her case. Thank you. Hope that was helpful.